Hello, everyone, again, and welcome to day 2, session 3, the last session of the Community Justice Through Safe and Healthy Streets Summit. Some of you, maybe all of you, probably remember me. It's Caressa, and I'm going to be the moderator for this last session. So I started out on day 1 with you all, and I'm capping you off, and then we're going to go on to Alderwoman Dmitrievich. The session theme for this third one is advocating for safe streets, data you can use. My gender pronouns are she and her. I'm mixed race. I have brown eyes, dark, short, curly hair, and I'm wearing a white t-shirt. This is a recorded webinar style session. That means that attendees' mics are unavailable. However, attendees may use the chat or the Q&A. And if you've been with us, by now you know how to use all the whistles and bells. Presenters, you have 15 minutes to present. I'll provide you with a verbal 4-minute remaining reminder to keep you on track. Our first presenter is Mitch Henke. Mitch is an MKU resident, active transportation advocate, member of the Bike and Pedestrian Task Force, and a coder. And I'll say, I think he's a coder for better quality civic life, if you can agree with me on that, Mitch. Mitch's presentation is titled, Where Can We Improve Milwaukee Public Transit? Take it away.
One second. Cool. So yeah, hopefully everybody can see that. And so today I'm Mitchell Henke. I use he, him pronouns. And as Chris said, I work in software. I'm on the Milwaukee Bike and Pedestrian Task Force through the city. And today I wanted to talk about where can we improve Milwaukee public transit and where can we do it using public data. And that's the big focus of mine is using public data to kind of find ways we can understand and improve things. I'd like to start out by saying the bus is awesome. In 2019, MCT has provided almost 29 million rides, which is over 79,000 rides per day. And I think that's incredible. It's a lot of people that got where they needed to go safely. Right, so improving bus service. My focus is on speed. There's a lot of things that go into successful public transit, reliability, frequency, but I like to focus on speed because speed is both directly helpful. It results in better service. You're going to get where you're going sooner if it's going faster. But there are other kind of knock-on effects to that. And an example I like to use is that if you had a 15-mile bus route and you wanted to run a bus every hour, if that bus were going 15 miles an hour, you would only need one bus to make the loop just in time. But if that bus was only able to go 7.5 miles per hour, you'll now need 2 buses and 2 bus operators. And that's going to be twice as expensive, at least for the same frequency. And so when we have faster buses, that means we can run more buses more efficiently at the same cost. And the other part of that is that those improvements can be applied elsewhere. If I don't need to run that one bus on this route, I could run it on another route. I could potentially add another route. And so improving speed and efficiency is helpful both directly and can help the network and system overall. On top of that, I think finding ways to make the bus successful is important because there's a feedback cycle to this. Cuts in service result usually in less riders, which is less revenue, which typically results in more service cuts and less riders and less revenue. And so it's grimly called the death spiral because it's difficult to recover from that. On the flip side, improving service can lead to more riders and more revenue, which can lead to expanded service. And so in Milwaukee, at the very least. We are on the bad side of that. We've been cutting service for a number of years. Ridership has been falling, and we're continuing to cut service, and we're going to continue to see ridership fall. And so finding ways that we can improve service both efficiently and to the people that need it, I think we're reaching a very critical point. So when I'm thinking, when and where a bus is slow, how could we understand this? The first kind of thing that occurred to me was, the bus schedule can tell us. It tells us timings, when buses are going to arrive at specific locations and how long it's going to take. And we can get it for every stop, for every route, for every day. And typically, the schedule looks something like this, where it's just a list of stops and times. That's difficult to analyze. I would need a lot of paper to see all of the routes. But fortunately, and the important part of that is that MCTS does have people on the buses that time it to make sure that it's as accurate as it can be. It's based in real numbers and real rides. But fortunately, MCTS also publishes what's called the General Transit Feed Specification, which is ultimately a bunch of text files which specifies almost every aspect of the service that they offer. And that includes the locations of bus stops, the geographic routes that the buses take for every route. And crucially, this is public data. Anybody can go and download it and make their own bus schedule app if they wanted. And this is the same technology that agencies across the world use to publish transit schedule information. And it's the same format that a lot of apps like Google Maps or Apple Maps or others are able to consume. And since it's standard, it makes it easy for them to leverage this public data. So for me, when the text files contain everything, but my focus being on speed, I wanted to get a better idea of how buses vary in speed throughout the day along different routes. So I made a website. The link is there in the bottom, civics.mitchellhinkie.com/transit. And it's surprising in some ways and less surprising in others. But buses are a lot slower in the middle of the day than they are in the morning and at night. And it's due to a variety of factors, right? There's going to be more riders and more congestion in the middle of the day. But the difficult part here is that our buses are a lot slower when the most people are riding it. And so we're seeing a lot of time wasted or potential for improvement to save a lot of time. And it's helpful to see it geographically as well. So this is kind of my crude map of bus speeds for different routes. And this is route 15, 51, 21, and 22. And the colors denoting different speeds, red being the slowest, and orange, yellow, and green being increasing speeds. And probably not surprising, the buses slow down a lot in downtown and tend to speed up as you get further away. But I wanted to highlight the difference in speed can be rather significant. Route 21 is a pretty simple route. It's running basically straight down North Avenue from UWM to Mayfair Mall and back. And in the middle of the night, it's able to go almost 19 miles an hour, which is that's good for a bus. But in the middle of the day, it's 40% slower, which is significant. And that means there's a lot of room for improvement. We just need to see, where and when those improvements would be. And the problem, I think, is that the bus schedule isn't perfect. It's an average of a lot of different days, and it has to kind of accommodate for a lot of unknowns. It'd be great if we could use something like real-time data. And fortunately, we can. In 2014, MCTS launched their real-time data, which allowed people to see estimated arrival times live. and see bus locations live, you could open an app and see where the bus you were planning on getting on is. You could see if it was, 10 blocks away or 2 blocks away and you needed to kind of hurry to get there. And the even better, and I think great part of this is that MCTS also offers this data to the public. You can sign up and get a key that basically allows you to request the locations of all of the buses and estimated arrival time. So anybody can build their own app if they wanted to kind of convey this information. For me, what I used this data to just collect it. You can get the bus locations, and so I stored both the bus location and the bus time, the bus route, and kind of all of the information. And that allows you to kind of reconstruct pretty precisely how every single bus moves through the bus network in Milwaukee. And so I focused my kind of preliminary analysis on Route 15. It's one that I'm more familiar with. But for those that are less familiar, Route 15 runs north and south between Capitol Drive and Drexel Boulevard in South Milwaukee. And you can usually do that trip in about 50 to 60 minutes. When I have geographic data, one of the first things I like to do is just put it on a map to see what it looks like. And so this is a sample of that real-time data of a Route 15 bus moving through downtown. And the red dots are locations of the bus over time, and the yellow dots are bus stops. And this data being so precise, you can see exactly when, or approximate pretty well when a bus arrives at a given stop. And so you can do analysis. You can see how often a bus is on time. You can compare it to the schedule, going back weeks, or however you would like to do it. As I was kind of talking a little bit earlier, my focus has been on the speed of buses. And so I used that data to kind of calculate, using the schedule, we know the exact distance that a bus is going. It gives us kind of the geographic path. And we also know when the buses are arriving at specific stops. And so with the time and the distance, we can have a great idea of what the speed of buses are. And so the speed listed here is kind of a sample of northbound Route 15 between June 2nd and June 4th from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. That time frame is kind of what MCTS considers their peak and most frequent ridership hours. And it's similar to the map based on the schedule in terms of results and speed. So starting in the south at Chicago and College in Cudahy, the bus is going almost 20 miles an hour, and it's able to at least maintain that or get faster as it moves into Milwaukee and Southern Bayview. But as Route 15 gets closer to through Walker's Point and into downtown, it's going 12 or 13 miles an hour, which is, again, almost 40% slower. And I think that's confirmation, again, that we have a lot of room for improvement. A lot of bus routes go through downtown, and finding ways to improve it there, I think, could have a significant impact on the overall network. And there's a lot of this data. There's a lot more questions we could ask. My focus was on existing service, and we could identify patterns hour to hour, day to day, week to week, and kind of along different dimensions. Could we use it to help us notice issues sooner? Or is there something that's causing a delay in a certain section of the county? And could we address that faster? Could we use it to identify specific inefficiencies in our routes? And the data here is mostly focused on existing service. I think it's important to acknowledge that there are other areas that need help in terms of bus service in Milwaukee, because we can't see what bus service would look like, where we need to expand it, and where people should be getting service but aren't, because there's no data for buses that we aren't running yet. I don't think data is the most pressing problem. I think data is a way to augment our understanding of how we can direct and improve efficiency that in a way that benefits the overall system. But I don't think data is kind of the main focus in terms of how we want to improve and reverse kind of the decline of bus service in the city. I think I'm near the end of time. That's all I've got. The first link there is the link that I mentioned earlier that has some of my analysis of the bus schedule. The other two are links of other cities that are using data to advocate for improved service around the country. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, Mitch. We really appreciate that. Now, our second presenter is Celia Jackson. Celia is a Milwaukee County resident and advocate for issue-related safe driving. And Celia is a founding member of the Coalition for Safe Driving. Celia, I'm so happy to have you here finally. Celia's presentation title, correct me if I'm wrong, Celia, but it's using data to tell your story. All right, go ahead.
And Celia, you're on mute.
Okay. All right. So, good afternoon. My name is Celia Jackson. I'm with the Coalition for Safe Driving, MKE. I am a Black female, use the pronouns she and her, brown eyes, mostly gray hair, and a big advocate for social justice and looking at root causes. The Coalition for Safe Driving, MKE, is a group of individuals as well as organizations that have come together, many of whom who have been on this series the last couple of days, including Sherman Park Community Association, Villard Bid, the WCS, Wisconsin Justice Initiative, Northwest Side CDC, Employ Milwaukee, Community Insurance Information Center, Youth Justice Milwaukee, Running Rebels, Urban Underground, Wisconsin Bike Fed, Havenwood, MPS Drive, and Safe and Sound. And so I'm going to share a little bit about our story and how we kind of came to be, and one of the different aspects of safe driving that we've been advocating. There has been a tremendous amount of great information that has been shared. I mean, I've learned so much this last couple of days on the creativity, the engagement of residents in Milwaukee and all over in Los Angeles and other parts of the country. So it's really been exciting to hear all of the different ideas. So I'm just really thankful for this summit and having an opportunity to share. Let me just talk about why sharing a story. A story is something that we all like. We all have them. I mean, there are many stories that we have encountered over life, over our time, but they establish a sense of authenticity because they're so relatable. And so when the Coalition for Safe Driving, MKE, came together, really our big issue was reckless driving. We were very concerned about it on so many different levels. And there were 3 different areas of focus that we came up with, which were education, public awareness, and Vision Zero. And so when we talked about using data, and I know I'm presenting stuff that's really kind of basic because we've seen so much data that's been really complex. But in my world, because I'm not a statistician, in making a case for data, we have to make it graphic. And so I came up with a couple of these just very standard pie charts and bar graphs that are often used. We need to make it simple so that people can understand it, because we know that with data, it can be very complex or it can be really very basic. And for me, the most basic is better. And but we also have to make it compelling. So when we look at one of these heat maps here, we can see where there's a concentration of activity in a particular area. So there are a couple of inquiries in sharing the story that I'd like to talk about. I'd like to talk about what's predictable if we don't really do anything. What steps have we seen taken? And we've heard a lot of them. And what's missing? Because I still would say to you that there is still something missing. We know that there's a lot of engagement and activity across the city, but there is still something missing. I just note that yesterday when I was on the session, I received a phone call from Channel 58 about the crash that happened up on 76th and Good Hope the other night, where there were 5 people involved, 1 killed, several who were seriously injured. And so we really have some very significant issues that we have to undertake in our community as it relates to this. So my advocacy today is around Vision Zero, because while we know education is important and we know public awareness is important, and the coalition received money from DPW to do public awareness around reckless driving, really Vision Zero is, I think, the big ticket item that really could take us to the next level. And I was so appreciative of Salita's comments yesterday about Vision Zero and just hearing all of the things that were being done in Los Angeles around that. But let me just tell you basically what Vision Zero is. It's a concept that began in Sweden back in the late 90s to reduce traffic fatalities to zero. It operates under the notion that traffic deaths are preventable and that even one fatality is too many. And it has an inclusive and big picture approach to traffic management with a specific focus on safety. It encompasses a collaboration of city, county agencies, residents, leaders, committing their energy and resources to working towards a common goal. So there are 5 big E's when it comes to Vision Zero, and they are education. Now we know that education is something that is critically important. We've seen that education was taken out of the high schools. It's back in the high schools now, but it's on a much more limited basis. And we know we need to educate more people. We need to be starting at an earlier age in junior high school if necessary, in civic and health related classes. We need to be reaching out and educating adults that never had an opportunity for learning the rules of the road, because that is a really significant factor. And then there's engineering. And I think I'm not going to talk too much about engineering because we've been hearing a lot of different engineering ideas over the course of the last 2 days that I think that are significant and important. And engineering is clearly an important part of this comprehensive strategy to take on reducing traffic fatalities. We need to have enforcement, but I do think that we need to look at enforcement in some non-traditional ways. Many people know that in Milwaukee, there was a traffic safety unit that was recently created, and they have issued over 7,000 tickets in the last couple of months. And while that, some might say, oh, that's really great, we know that there's still a lot of reckless driving that's happening out there. And so we have to look at some other solutions and not just the traditional ones in order to curb this particular issue. And then we know that there's equity. We need a presence in all parts of the city. I can't tell you how critical it is, because we have so much disparity in the city of Milwaukee as it relates to a whole host of things. And there were a number of presenters that talked about this equitable piece that has been missing. When you look at certain parts of the city that have been receiving lots of attention and other parts that have not been receiving that same attention. And those parts of the city are where we're seeing so many challenges and so many crashes. And engagement, community engagement is critical. We've been hearing a lot about community engagement, and people have been really very much involved. But we need to work all of these together collaboratively. So what I did in presenting this story today is I'm borrowing a playbook out of Madison, the city of Madison, because the city of Madison, when they were looking at this idea of Vision Zero, what they did was they compared crashes with public safety. And so what I did was I looked at the last 2 years, 2019 and 2020, and we had 143 fatalities between those 2 years and 287 homicides. And I kind of tried to compare certain types of traffic incidents with public safety measures. And you can see the numbers here, how significant they are and how comparable they are. And I went ahead and did just a look. So 50% of our crashes are of the same number of homicides. And in our major injuries, 65% of the number of rapes that occurred in Milwaukee. And then minor injuries, 27% if we look at a comparison with aggravated assaults. And then look at property damage only. Those are cases where there were crashes. And so over 300% of cases resulted in some kind of crash and property damage compared to the number of motor vehicle thefts. Although I suspect that number might be altered because I just recently heard that there have been such a significant increase of motor vehicle thefts in Milwaukee most recently. And then I go on to talk about injuries, possible injuries and burglaries, and the total crashes. So total crashes, 77% of all incidents, and obviously I didn't list all the different types of public safety offenses, but that's about 77% of all of them. So when I looked at the crash fatalities, and I created this graph where you can see series 1, what at the top line is really series 2, which is the county of Milwaukee. And then the second line is the more lime green, which is the city of Milwaukee. And you can see they're kind of like in par with one another. So the city of Milwaukee really does have the most significant number of crashes in Milwaukee County. So those are kind of neck and neck, and you can see where they had a cross section in 2018 where the number of crashes went down, but they have obviously continued to rise up. But I compared that with Dane County, which is the next largest county in the state of Wisconsin, and also the one that will probably have the most other significant crashes. And look how much further down the line they are as far as their fatalities over a period of time, over this several year period of time. And yet they are moving forward with Vision Zero in their community because they are seeing such an increase that's going on. So I looked at what are some of the factors. Now, this is not the most up-to-date information. I think this is collected from 2016 to 2018, and looked at what are some of the driving factors that are causing crashes. 30% are being attributed to hit and run cases, 11% to speeding, 20% to traffic controls, where a person ignores a traffic control, and then inattentive driving, and then the rest. But 69% of the cases are really very highly criminal related. And I would imagine that in some of these others, when you look at inattentive driving, you might be looking at texting. I'm sure there's some operating under the influence that's going to come into the picture here. But the numbers are not nearly as significant when you look at these increases of types of factors that are causing crashes in our community. And so what I want to say is this. I think that so much of what we've talked about has been looking at the issues of addressing reckless driving from some creative measures in engineering. But the reason that I really advocate for something like Vision Zero is we can't continue to parcel out. In one section, we do education. In one section, we do engineering. In another segment, we're having our residents that are very much engaged. Another that is looking at enforcement. We really need to bring all of these pieces together under the same umbrella. That's why we need a comprehensive strategy, that we're all working from the same page, we're all operating from the same playbook, we're all operating collaboratively with a vision to reduce these traffic fatalities and promote traffic safety. Some of the ideas that I had that I thought would be possible are, what about a conversation and dialogue and platform that immerses in the value of civic engagement, responsibility, and accountability? I don't really know if people who are engaged in some of the crashes that we see really understand and appreciate the gravity of the circumstances. And I think that we have to really do a much more significant and intentional job of making sure we're reaching all parts of our community and making sure that we're understanding better what's going on. I mean, I really wish I could say I had an appreciation for what would cause someone to be engaged in a high-speed chase with the police department, why they would run. And there would probably be a lot of different anecdotal stories, but I just really think that we have to look and see, how do we get to some of the root causes of some of these issues. So I think that all of what has been presented today has to be done in collaboration with looking more intentionally at these root causes and coming up with a much more comprehensive strategy, because we can't step over these root causes. We can't step over the fact that some people are not living in communities where they can fully thrive. We can't step over the fact that there are people who are living in communities where it's a public health crisis. It's just so dangerous to get in your car and to drive, or to allow your kids to play on the street or to bicycle. I mean, we've just heard story after story. So I am advocating for Vision Zero, for Milwaukee to really take this under consideration and look at it as a major possibility, to look to see how we can shift what's been happening in our community. So I want to say thank you and see if there are any questions.
All right, Celia, thank you so much. You did swimmingly. You hit your mark on timing and you got to the point. I love it. I love to see it. If you don't mind, I'm going to reserve questions for the final presentation for everyone. I definitely have some questions for you. So our final presenter is Kate Reardon. Kate was with us yesterday. She does work for a local government agency, but she's a wonderful advocate within, and I loved to have her as a coworker at the Bike Fed long ago. Kate's a transportation planner for the City of Milwaukee Department of Public Works Multimodal Unit. And Kate's presentation is engaging communities around complete streets data. Kate, take it away.
Thanks, Caressa. I think, Celia, you need to stop sharing your screen so I can share mine. And while she's, thank you very much. Thanks, Caressa, for that introduction. Thanks, Celia, for your amazing presentation. I'm sad that I've got to go after you with all your great passion around Vision Zero and engaging communities around reckless driving. Thanks so much for your advocacy there. So I, like Caressa said, I'm Kate Reardon, transportation planner with the City Milwaukee Department of Public Works. I am a white woman with brown hair in a ponytail, and I am wearing a white and black check top with a black bow, and I use she, her pronouns. So go ahead and get this. Okay, so as Carissa said, my presentation is titled Engaging Communities Around Complete Streets Data. And I just want to kind of back up and talk a little bit about complete streets in general. This is a term that's come up throughout yesterday and today, and I'm not sure if we took the time to really give a definition of what complete streets is, and even if you've got a good idea, it's always good to have a little refresher. So complete streets, I would just like to say complete streets are streets for everybody, whether you're young or old, you're riding a bike, you're walking, you're taking transit, or you're driving. A complete street is a street that is safe, it's comfortable, and it's convenient for you. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that convenience means you can speed down the street if you're driving. It also doesn't mean that we're going to have transit or bike lanes on every street. Complete streets are also context sensitive, which means they respond to the needs of the streets. Who are the most vulnerable users on that street? Who should we be designing for? Who should we have in mind when we're creating these streets? So as has been mentioned previously, we have a complete streets policy in Milwaukee, an award-winning policy. And this complete streets policy was passed in October 2018, passed unanimously by Common Council, signed by Mayor Barrett in October. We had strong community support. Carissa started the day out by talking about some of those partners and how they advocated for community engagement in this policy development. And I just want to give another thank you to Carissa and the other partners we had there. You can see a number of them standing there behind Mayor Barrett as he's signing it. So a complete streets policy in general, just to say like a very broad, painted with a broad brushstroke, complete streets means that when we reconstruct, repave, do any kind of major work to streets, we're taking into consideration all those different users that I talked about on the previous slide. But again, like I said, it's context sensitive. Not every user is going to have a space on every single street. Like I said, there's not going to be transit on a residential street, but we are designing with vulnerable users in mind. I also will say, you know, as advocates who are on here know, we're not perfect in this. I don't think any city is perfect in its implementation of complete streets. And it's not a silver bullet. Just signing this policy doesn't mean that the next day everything's going to be perfect. This is a work in progress. And one of the ways that we're measuring this work in progress is through our Milwaukee Complete Streets Health and Equity Report. So as part of the policy that was passed, we are required to develop an annual report to report on metrics related to complete streets implementation every year. So I think this is pretty cool. We don't have many policies that are passed at the city level where we are reporting out and accountable for what we're doing every year. So having this complete streets annual report is a really great way for us to show the work that we're doing and also to acknowledge some of the work we still have to do. And we do that pretty well through some of our case studies that we have in this report. So just a couple words on this, the title Health and Equity Report. I want to give another shout out to Carissa for really pushing our Complete Streets implementation team to focus on health and equity and measure and take into consideration the impacts on health and equity as we're implementing the policy. There is a great example of a health and equity report in New Orleans that she brought to our attention. And so we integrated that and used that as a model as we were working on this. I also have to thank Dr. Bob Schneider for coming up with the metrics that we use for this. We had some that are required by the policy, but we're definitely reporting on more than that, and have to give a big thanks to Bob for his work on developing those metrics. So in order to figure out how to assess our health and equity goals, we needed to come up with a geographic area that we could measure some of the metrics against. So we're reporting on metrics at a citywide level and then also by a smaller level. So we actually took a look at a number of different factors. I came up with a couple of different maps where we prioritize different health outcomes for census tracts, things like income level, language spoken at home, disability, and that brought out some different geographies that showed that these different metrics were emphasized more in those areas. And we had also previously looked at these neighborhood revitalization strategy areas, NRSAs. So this was a geography that is defined, uses some definitions based on income that the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development uses for their CDBG funds. And it will probably come as no surprise to anyone who has a good understanding of social determinants of health, that the geographies that we came up with measuring different health and demographic outcomes are very similar to this geography that only looks at income. So that's a really long explanation of how we came up with how to use this area. But I just want to emphasize, there's that big connection between not only race and income and disability and all these other impacts that are really your social determinants of health that we wanted to focus on as we measured our Complete Streets policy. I believe Mike also mentioned yesterday this Common Council resolution, racial equity resolution that was passed in July of 2019. So this really helped us decide that we needed to put equity at the forefront. So I also want to take a moment to talk a little bit about the difference between equity and equality. Equity has been talked about a lot, and it's, sometimes it becomes a bit of a buzzword for people. So I just want to take some time to talk about what does equity actually mean. So equality is where everybody gets the same thing. And there's a lot of cute graphics out there of showing the difference between equality and equity. This one I like because, it's people on bikes. It really speaks to our audience here. So you can see in that top image there, equality, everybody has the same bike, and it doesn't really, it fits well for one person, but it doesn't fit well for other people. On the bottom, you can see that people have been given the bike that they need. So they've got the right size, they've got the right one for their ability. And I think one thing that we don't really talk about, like I said, this is a cute image that, you can see, okay, now people have what they need. But what we don't always talk about is the different resources needed for equity. So I guarantee in the equity image that the adaptive bike on the left probably costs a lot more than the child's bike on the right. So this is a tough conversation to have, especially, at the city level, at like DPW. How do we tell certain alders that maybe their district doesn't need as many projects in it as another district based on, past historic disinvestment in certain areas of the city? So we're not doing this perfectly either, but I did just want to acknowledge that there is this difference between equality and equity. And this is something that we at DPW are really trying to focus on and figure out how can we do this. So back to the Complete Streets Health and Equity Report. So it's split up into 4 different sections. So we have changes to internal processes, Complete Streets projects, Our Streets Today, and changes in long-term health trends. So I'm just going to run through some of the things that are in these different sections. So changes to internal processes in our 2019 report. This section was mostly narrative. So we had some information about our budget and the budget that the multimodal that was assigned to multimodal improvements, our coordination efforts. I believe in the previous session, the panelists, when asked what can the city do, they asked, we need to be talking, the different departments need to be talking to each other. And we know that that's an issue, and that's something that's an issue in all cities and even large corporations. So it's not unique to Milwaukee, but it is something that we definitely need to do. And one of the ways we're working on that is through having a Complete Streets implementation team that has staff members from DPW, the Health Department, and Department of City Development. Building awareness around complete streets. This is something that we focused on in 2019, both internally and externally. We had a training by Smart Growth America on complete streets implementation for internal DPW and DCD staff. And externally, we really worked on our communications and the language that we use when talking about different types of streets and improvements. For project development, we really tried to involve more people in early conversations and figure out how to best select projects also. And then engagement, we tried out some unique things. And yesterday, if you saw the sessions, you saw some even more unique things that we did really kind of forced to do because of the pandemic that we hope to continue on. But in 2019, we did a lot of pre and post walks. This image here is of a walk. This was actually a great collaboration between DPW and DCD working on 2 different projects in the same neighborhood. So then the Complete Streets projects, I think of this as really like our internal physical work. Most people, when they think about Complete Streets, they're really thinking about the physical changes to the streets. So this section covers those physical changes. So we report on Complete Streets project delivery, which I'll talk about with this image here in a second. Projects that are on our pedestrian high injury network. These were streets that were identified in the pedestrian plan as being the streets where pedestrians have the highest risk of being injured. Our low stress bikeway network. So how much are we adding to our protected bike lanes, bike boulevards, and trails every year? And then green infrastructure improvements. So how many street trees and bioswales are we installing each year? So I'll talk a little bit about, this is just what a sample table from this section of the report on Complete Streets project delivery and pedestrian high injury network. So it tells you, how many projects did we do? How many of these are actually considered complete streets? Both just in general and then also ones on the pedestrian high injury network. So you might notice that it says the first one is total number of major transportation projects. So we wanted to recognize, that repaving a residential street, unless it was designated a bike boulevard in our bike plan, we probably will not be making any changes to it. So we had to make a definition of a major transportation project of a certain length and a certain type of street. The next section is our streets today. So I really see this as the external reactions to our changes. So if we are building complete streets, we're making streets where people feel safe, comfortable, walking and biking, taking transit, we're going to see some of these numbers change. So the first one is work commute mode share. This is a number that we get from the American Community Survey, which is a part of the census. So that just is an estimate of how many people walked, biked, took transit to work. Intersection user counts. This is something that we did for the first time this year. We had not done it in 2019 for the report. So in the 2019 report, we just state the intersections where we're going to be doing these counts, but we did counts during the weekdays, we did counts on Saturdays, and we counted how many people were biking and walking through 20 intersections throughout the city. And we'll repeat this at the same intersections every year. So we'll be able to see changes at those intersections, hopefully. We also report on transit passenger counts, both MCTS and the HOP. Trail user counts, we have 6 permanent trail counters around the city. So those are reported on. Shared mobility counts in 2019, we have Bubbler Bike Share and dockless scooters. Safety, which is this chart here that I'll talk about in a second. Speeding is similar to the intersection user counts. We identified 20 locations where we're taking speeds every year. We did not do that in 2019, but we did do it in 2020. Perceptions is a survey. If you were here yesterday, Dr. Schneider talked about the survey they did. So this is reporting on that survey that Safe and Healthy Streets did. And then economic development is assessed value. This is something that we need to work a little bit on. We did assessed value of all properties throughout the city in 2019, but eventually we do want to start using some of those, figure out some economic development metrics to use related to projects. So the table here that I have is for fatalities and serious injuries. Again, we split it up between city and the NRSA, citywide and then the NRSA. So pedestrian, bicycle, motor vehicles fatalities, as well as serious injuries. And then the last section we have, this is a section that won't be repeated in 2020 because this is something that we expect will take, it's not something that changes very quickly. Long-term health trends are long-term, as the title suggests. So for this, we use a combination of information from the CDC, which has this 500 cities project where you can actually get health data at the census tract level. So we are able to look at it both citywide and then also at the NRSAs. For the statistic about children and physical activity, we use a community survey that Aurora Healthcare does that is not reported by NRSAs, so or census tract, so we're not able to do that there. But again, Complete Streets can have a big impact on health by allowing people to be physically active, improve air quality. So we do have a statistic there about asthma. So again, these are numbers that we hope to see change, but are not going to be changing in the short term. So we'll report on these every 4 years. So I know I titled this Engaging Communities Around Complete Streets Data, and we had to put in we had to submit our presentation titles ahead of submitting our presentation. So I had put that presentation title out there without really thinking about what I was going to present on. So I don't know that my presentation really was about engaging communities, but I did want to, talk a little bit about how can you use this data. So, and then how at the city can we use this data, or how are we using this data? So for community members, I think that this report will help you understand how the city is implementing the policy. You can understand what kind of metrics we're tracking. I didn't talk about the case studies that we do, but in the 2019 report, we had 2 positive case studies and then 1 where we had some lessons learned. So you can learn about the successful projects and projects where we need to make some improvements for the future. And then for the city, we really need to understand the long and short-term impacts that projects can have, both on things like economic development, but also health and safety. We can prioritize our projects based on data. And really something that I personally want to dig more into is integrating health and equity into project decision making. So that's something that I feel like is, again, a lot of this is a work in progress, and I'm really looking forward to continuing this work. If you're interested in reading the report, you can find it at milwaukee.gov/complete streets. We will be releasing the 2020 report soon, hopefully July. I put it on there, so maybe I'm going to hold myself to it. It is written, we've collected the data, it's just a matter of getting it all finalized and designed. And I think what's really cool is that I'm really glad that we started this in 2019. So we have 2019 data. If you think about the things we're reporting on, 2020 numbers are all going to have a giant asterisk next to them saying, this all happened during the pandemic. So a lot of these numbers are very different. So I think it's going to be really interesting to be able to look back at 2019 data, 2020, what was happening during the COVID pandemic, and then in subsequent years, this year, next year, how do these numbers change? How do they stay the same as as our lives really go back to normal, or not normal, or whatever things are going to look like in the future. So that is it for me.
Awesome. Kate, great presentation. I couldn't have said it any better.
Thanks.
I just want to say it's been a pleasure to work with you through this grant. And I'll say, as a resident and community organizer, I just really appreciate the Department of Public Works giving me a shot and listening to me and letting me bug you about all these different things that I think should be done. I just want everybody to know that I literally walked in the door you know, like maybe a year and a half ago into the city, and I just like said, we should do this, you know, Department of Health should do this. We need to get this Department of City Development involved, and you took a shot, and I think it's only going to get better, and you put a lot of hard work into that particular report. So thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions for any of the panelists? I know I have a question, but I'll wait a second. Okay, so maybe this is just a matter of re-emphasizing this, but to get back to how residents can leverage for change by using data. Sometimes it's really helpful. Sometimes it's exhausting, let's face it. But so gathering data, I've learned, can be really challenging. It's everywhere. And sometimes it's not exactly, you can't hold it in the palm of your hand, especially when it comes to Safe Streets data. So for anyone who in the community who needs to make a case for an issue, like a Safe Streets issue, what suggestions you have, like where to start, basically? Like an easy step, anyone can answer that.
Celia, did you want to answer? Do you want me to? You want me? Okay. So I think there's a lot of power in observations and getting to know, your street and identify some of those issues with your neighbors. And I think our keynote presentation this morning, when she talked about the bringing the community members on a walk and just like having them record their observations, I think that that's really great as a start. And then it can help you understand what kind of data you might want to collect after that. If you see, if you and your neighbors feel like there's cars are driving really fast on your street, WisDOT has this community mapping tool where you can see what kind of crashes happen. So that's one way that you could look out. But try to figure out what issues you're trying to advocate for first, and then what data is available around those issues.
So don't just come and complain to you.
I mean, people will do that anyway, right? Sorry.
Celia, anyone else have any other insights?
I was just going to say, I think it's absolutely important to collect data, and really just look to see what's happening in a particular neighborhood. I think Melody gave some insightful information yesterday about the things that were being done in Metcalf Park. But here's the other thing that I think that we have to really make sure that we balance. Because we can always talk about some of these things from an intellectual standpoint, but I honestly believe that there is so much trauma that exists in certain communities as it relates to some of these health issues, whether it's the dangerous driving, or whether it's any other things that affect a person's health. There is a lot of trauma out there, and we don't really talk about, I don't think that we've talked about it as much in this particular conference, but we have to really understand that that is present, and how do we make sure that we get information from people without traumatizing them anymore. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense, because initially when I asked the question, I couldn't help but think about the amount of feedback loops and surveys and things that we try to get from residents, and residents tell us, there is such thing as survey fatigue, and getting that data. It's like, can't you just look around you and see the problem, and we need your help, because things like, for instance, the pandemic are just compounding, and we just need the help. You need to help us. But, let's see, there's one last question I am going to pose, and unless anyone has any other questions. So this is from Virginia. What type of low-cost interventions, experiments might you suggest citizens, and I'll say residents as well, try to activate?
Well, I'll just say this. I thought that a number of the ideas that Salita mentioned in her presentation yesterday, I think would be considered. Some of them were low cost. I think that what's happening in the active streets on some of those are some suggestions of low cost. I mean, I think that we heard from Angelique today about some of the things that they're talking about in the Villard bid, and Ms. Cobbs, who was with her in Chicago. So, I mean, I think that there have been a number of things that have presented that can be low cost and getting people involved. And I think that those are really great. I just do think they are overlaid with some really bigger issues that we have to be willing to take on and we can't step over. And they're really critical, because we just don't want people to feel like they're doing something, but it's not really making a dent because there's such bigger social issues that are out there that they're having to deal with.
Great. I am going to ask Joyce's question. I'm sorry, I missed that, Joyce. So Joyce asks, it's probably directed for Kate, doing walk audits is helpful, like submitting that information to Department of Public Works. If a resident group did that, would that be helpful for you all? And if so, are there any specific forms or anything better than the other? For instance, I know there's like an AARP model or something like that.
Yeah, I think walk audits are great in having a form if you want to do things a little bit more formally. It's great. I think like there's two types of walk audits. You can do a more informal one, which is kind of what I was talking about previously. Like, you know, you just go out with people, you stop at certain locations, you talk about what works well here, what doesn't work well here, and then you can do a more formal one with a form. And yeah, I think the AARP one is good. And I'm totally going to do a plug for some work I did in a previous job where I created this active living guidebook. It's for Indiana, but you know, it can be applicable to Wisconsin too. But there's some suggestions. There's a section on how to do a community assessment and some suggestions, both doing like that formal walk audit and an informal walk audit, along with some links to different forums you can use. So I'll pop that in the chat.
Great. And just for any of you who never done